Yeah. True. I wonder why. Yeah, man. And that fear still drives Americans today. Well, you know, a certain group of Americans today. You know what I'm saying? Hey, man, we gonna get this knowledge today, y'all. This is PBS uh, uh, broadcast on January 12th, 2004. It's called The American Experience, Season 16, Episode 2, Reconstruction, the Second Civil War. This is what happened, what was documented right after the Civil War. People were trying to get their shit together. You feel me? Ha ha ha. This lady's talking about, slaves talking to me crazy. I don't know why they so mad. Bitch, you know why. 1,260 acres? Holy shit, that's a lot of fucking land, dog. 150 slaves, bro. Off the slaves of 150, privileged, upper echelon. Uh, I know she didn't really think that holding people against their will was a God-given right. Hey man, crazy. People just believe anything. Eh? Christmas.
For it, recalled one liberated slave. Just think of whole droves of people that had hardly ever left the plantation, turned loose all at once with nothing in the world but the clothes on their back. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had freed slaves across the South. But Washington still had no clear plan for what to do once African Americans were free. On January 11th, President Lincoln sent his Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton, to Savannah. Stanton instructed General Sherman to set up a meeting with some of the city's black ministers. He wanted to hear how the freedmen imagined their future in the South. That evening, 20 black men entered the grand parlor as guests of Stanton and Sherman. 16 were former slaves. They chose Reverend Garrison Frazier, who had purchased his freedom 9 years earlier, to be their spokesman. For the first time, federal officials conferred with freed slaves about the future of African Americans in the South.
The exchange that occurs between Sherman, Stanton, and the Union generals and Reverend Frazier is one of the extraordinary moments of the Civil War and the ending of the Civil War. Because they asked Frazier not just what should we do with all these refugees, they asked him questions about what the war meant. They asked him questions about what the Emancipation Proclamation had meant. They asked him what the presence of black troops in the Union Army meant. And in many ways, you'll find no better definition of the meaning of the Civil War and the kinds of answers that Garrison Frazier gives that day in Savannah.
The freedom, as I understand it, promised by the Emancipation Proclamation, is taking us from under the yoke of bondage and placing us where we could reap the fruit of our own labor.
To be a slave, as one of these ministers pointed out to General Sherman, was to be someone who had no control over his life's decisions. And now, these people feel the need to express their abilities, their choices.
The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land, and we can soon maintain ourselves and have something to spare. We want to be placed on land, until we're able to buy it and make it our own.
This was a man who never left probably coastal Georgia in his life. But he understood the Declaration of Independence. He understood the Emancipation Proclamation. And beyond that, he said, in effect, you should give us our rights, and you should protect our rights, and then you should leave us alone and let us be citizens.
4 days later, anxious to get thousands of freed slaves off his hands and Washington off his back, General Sherman issued Special Field Order 15. It was only a temporary order, but it became one of the most controversial of the Civil War. Plantations in the rice country had been abandoned by white planters during the war. 400,000 of these acres would be given over to African Americans for settlement. The huge land tract included the Sea Islands and parts of the Georgia and South Carolina coast.
Shit, they're talking about my family. That's where my family owns land, right there, South Carolina, Georgetown County.
40 acres of land will be given out to each family. Plus, Sherman says the Army's got tons of mules, which we don't
Damn, dude.
really need. They're broken down from our long march. If anyone wants a mule, they can have one of these mules. This is the origin of that famous phrase, 40 acres and a mule.
Here was a real revolution. A revolution in the land.
It's exactly what happened to my family. Like, we still have that land today. We still have that 40 acres. I mean, it's like 38, 37, 36 acres. But it's ours.
On the land, a chance to be their own freeholders.
For 4 million African Americans in the South, news of 40 acres and a mule spread as fast as the contagion of freedom itself. Many saw this as proof that emancipation would finally give black men and women a true stake in the land they had toiled on for centuries.
Our forces are victorious. Great peace rumors are afloat, and General Lee has certainly given Grant's army a good drubbing. We hear that General Sherman is dead.
Through the winter and spring of 1865, Kate Stone and her mother remained in Texas, clinging to every desperate rumor of rebel victory. In April, they learned the true state of things. At a courthouse in Appomattox, Virginia, Lee had surrendered his army. The Confederate rebellion had been crushed.
Conquered, submission, subjugation are words that burn into my heart. The degradation seems more than we can bear.
What a hater. All lost.
I think
Get
those
over
words had particular relevance in a white Southern society that was fixated on honor. Honor and glory, independence were at the core of the white South's understanding of itself, and particularly the understanding that male Southerners had of what it meant to be men, what it meant to have manhood. Because who is conquered, subjugated, that's a slave.
The white South can only imagine that they must have invoked God's wrath in some way.
Think.
Maybe God is punishing us. But surely he does not mean for black people to be their equal. Maybe slavery was meant to end, but surely God didn't mean for black people to stand alongside whites.
There's a story of a slave who ran away from his master, joined the Union Army, and came back into the South and seized his own master's plantation with his regiment. And he sees his former master and he says, "Bottom rail on top this time, massa." Bottom rail's on top now.
Ooh, boy, what? Don't play. Stop playing, boy.
In his first speech after the Union victory, Lincoln alluded to the enormous challenges Reconstruction would bring. He even suggested that some black men in the South might get the vote. His words infuriated many, including a Confederate sympathizer who assassinated the president 3 days later. With Lincoln gone, the question of how to put the country back together again took on even greater urgency. Northerners were exhausted by 4 years of war. Most had hoped Lincoln would reconcile North and South and get the states back to normal relations as soon as possible. But there was no consensus on how to achieve this. Just as uncertain was the future of millions of black men and women freed into a society where many whites, North and South, questioned the idea of any rights for former slaves.
The notion of civil rights for blacks was revolutionary. 19th century Americans' whole notion of what it meant to be an American was all wrapped up in whiteness. An American was a person with white skin.
Here you have the great questions of Reconstruction immediately are what people faced. Who will rule in the South? Who will rule in the federal government? And what will the dimensions of black freedom be?
All eyes looked to Washington. Former Confederates held their breath and steeled themselves for the worst.
The South doesn't know what to expect. Will there be punishment for leaders? Will there be land confiscated? Will there be an occupying army?
All that.
And a lot of people imagine that these traitors, these people who have tried to destroy the United States, should be executed, should be imprisoned.
No one was sure what to expect from the new president. Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee, but he had fiercely opposed the Confederate secession and was the only Southern senator who refused to give up his seat in Congress.
Andrew Johnson embodies a lot of the hopes that Abraham Lincoln has, that the Union can be put back together easily. But Andrew Johnson had been an outspoken enemy of the big planners who he blamed for causing secession.
In Tennessee politics, he saw himself as a spokesman for the poor whites. He owned a slave or two, but he was not a member of the plantation aristocracy. In fact, he resented them very much.
Oh, that nigga was that dude was a hater. Paper went straight.
First speech after taking office, Johnson warned that traitors had to be
Niggas
punished.
hating on the rich, boy. What the fuck? Get your paper up,
But
man.
Johnson shared the white South's desire to keep blacks subordinate. Frederick Douglass, the renowned black leader, got his own impression of Johnson when the two met for the first time at Lincoln's second inaugural.
The very first expression that came over Johnson's face was one of scorn and derision. And Douglas concluded that that expression was the true index of his heart.
He was like, wait, that dude a hater.
Douglas turned to a companion and said, "Whatever else this man may be, he is no friend of our race."
Even as Lee surrendered to Grant, scores of newly emancipated men and women were arriving at St. Catherine's in the Sea Islands of Georgia. Under Sherman's Field Order 15, these abandoned lands would be theirs. Leading them was 53-year-old Tunis G. Campbell from New Jersey. For years, Campbell had worked tirelessly as an abolitionist, a preacher, an educator, and political organizer. With the help of Secretary of War Stanton, Campbell got himself appointed superintendent for the Union-occupied islands in Georgia.
There are a lot of people in 1865 who were trying to tell blacks what freedom is and tell them what they ought to be doing. Campbell reflects the impulse we should really determine ourselves what we're doing. Independence from white control, that's critical to their definition of what freedom is. It just happens that on St. Catherine's Island, you can create such a thing. The whites have all fled, Sherman has given out land, so the opportunity to create an independent black community exists.
We left with rations and a few families, and at Hilton Head got more, Campbell wrote. And Savannah loaded us as deep as we could swim. These deserted lands had been at the heart of the South's rice-growing empire.
As Campbell arrived to the island and they put the gangplank down, the island was overgrown. It's been looted by Union naval forces. The seagrass is high. There are rattlesnakes. There are alligators.
Still to this day in that area. And my family was rice planters. Rice planters, yes.
See the slave cabins. They're also in great disrepair. Immediately upon arriving and assessing the situation there, he writes to the American Missionary Association, asking for seed, asking for plows, sweet potatoes to supplement the diet, marriage licenses for the people. And he calls a meeting of the people to explain to them, this is our home. Beginning next week, I will divide up the land into 40 acres for each of you.
By June, the settlers had crops in the ground. I have corn, watermelons, citron, onions, radishes, and squash, wrote Campbell. But the rebels have destroyed the sweet potatoes. Do not fail to send them. Send 8 number 11 plows, 6 cultivators, get the improved ones.
Tunis Campbell sees the South as a kind of new political frontier. Sees himself as a kind of political pioneer to go to that place where this new regime of black political liberty and civil liberty might flourish.
Campbell arrived at St. Catherine's with his own blueprint for a government. There would be a Congress with 8 men in the Senate and 20 in the House of Representatives, a Supreme Court, and Campbell himself as president. He even established a 275-man militia. Order, said Campbell, is heaven's first law.
So you've got this tiny little island, 12 miles long, 3 miles wide, and a government set up to resemble the United States government with a Supreme Court at the top. It's wonderful. What beautiful experiment in democracy. And people took to it very well. They liked the idea of having the power to select their leaders and remove them.
But at St. Catherine's, no one was going to remove Tunis Campbell. That same fall, 9 black soldiers and their white captain climbed aboard a sternwheeler in New Orleans and headed upriver. The captain, Marshal Twitchell, was a career soldier from Vermont who had led black troops during the war. He had fought at Antietam, Fredericksburg, the Wilderness, and just about every other major battle in the East.
Twitchell is one of those Union veterans who enlist in the first year of the war and stays the duration. He's wounded several times. He gets a mini ball right in his face. It cuts a groove around his face and exits behind his ear. he'll have the scar for the rest of his life.
The war was over, and Twitchell was restless. In New Orleans, he got himself a commission in the Freedmen's Bureau. In the chaotic post-war South, the job of the Freedmen's Bureau agent was to smooth the transition from slavery to freedom. The Bureau built schools for the former slaves and fed and clothed war refugees, black and white. Twitchell was posted to Bienville Parish in northern Louisiana, a place he knew nothing about.
Here he is on a stern-wheeler heading up the Red River. This region had never been conquered, so he's entering the last part of the Confederacy to surrender. It is dangerous, exotic, it's isolated, and he doesn't know it, but he is entering what is probably the most violent place in America. It's no coincidence that Harriet Beecher Stowe chose to put the final brutal ending of Uncle Tom's Cabin, where Uncle Tom is beaten to death by Simon Legree. It's no coincidence that she puts it on the upper Red River. It's a violent region.
I was without telegraphy, railway, or water connections, remembered Twitchell. If I'd known beforehand what my position was to be, I should have remained with my regiment. At the courthouse in Sparta, the county seat, Captain Twitchell set up office as the sole Freedmen's Bureau agent for the parish. He soon discovered his new neighbors were as hardened to battle as he was.
My great-grandfather had 2 brothers killed in the war and another wounded, and I'm named after one of them. There wasn't a family here that didn't lose somebody to the war. But in our little area, these veterans were never defeated, and that is a lot of the feeling here. The war just ended, and so everybody went home. And up into the midst of this came Twitchell.
The people in the area are wary. They don't quite know what to expect. But they quickly discover that this Freedmen's Bureau agent is somebody that they're going to have to deal with.
Agents like Twitchell had military authority to settle labor disputes and conflicts between former slaves and masters.
The planters certainly resented this intrusion into so sensitive an area. They wanted direct control over black laborers. They didn't want some Yankee Freedmen's Bureau agent there questioning their behavior, actually sitting them down and having them testify. And for the freedmen, here was somebody that they could go to if they were mistreated. He can't fundamentally change the economic lives of these people. All he can do is try to be a mediator, to give them some degree of justice.
Twitchell would soon learn that for a Yankee officer all alone in Northwest Louisiana, even a degree of federal justice might be too much.
That's crazy. Well, we know what that means.
For the first 48 days of Andrew Johnson's presidency, Southerners waited anxiously to hear what he would demand before allowing them back into the Union. On May 29, 1865, Johnson announced his plan for what would be called presidential reconstruction.
There was good evidence in 1865 that a lot of white Southerners, leadership even of the Confederacy, would have accepted relatively harsh policies at that moment. But very soon it became clear that Andrew Johnson wanted a rapid, lenient restoration of the Union with as little alteration of the Constitution and the creation of black civil and political rights as possible.
Johnson would issue blanket pardons for most former Confederates. The rebel states would be encouraged to form new governments quickly. Washington would not interfere. The president's leniency surprised many in the North. Southerners responded with relief.
Johnson actually sets only the most minimal requirements. All they have to do is admit we lost the Civil War. The Civil War is over, slavery and secession are dead. Other than that, there are no requirements.
Johnson was harder on the planter aristocracy. He insisted that wealthy planters and Confederate leaders write him personally and beg for clemency.
Oh, my daughter's up and I'm not gonna go back and forth. We will continue this another time, you fool.